Friends, I am Dr. Kuldeep Mohadikar. In this video, I will present my 30th chapter from my series Literary Pearls. The title of this chapter is Robert Browning's Dramatic Monologue. Browning's genius was essentially dramatic. His dramatic bent of mind is seen in his characterizations and in the unfolding of strong dramatic situations. He took to writing plays for the public stage in right earnest and produced at least 8 plays in a period of 8 years. The poet was tired of writing for the stage and turned to dramatic monologue. This was so because his dramas were hopeless failures. He failed because his plays were deficient in action and lacked a sustained plot. A drama is essentially a representation of action. But in Browning's play, his real interest lay in soul study, introspection, and psychological analysis, so his plays were stage failures. His dramatic skill as well as his painting interior landscapes could be exercised to advantage in the dramatic monologue. It was this poetic form that he became the supreme exponent. Browning has been regarded as the greatest champion of dramatic monologue in English language. Browning used the dramatic monologue with amazing skill and success. Browning made this form entirely his own because it suited his genius and also because it has a number of other advantages. It is an indirect mode of expression, and so the poet could freely express his views without fear of hostile criticism. The dramatic monologue is dramatic because it is the utterance of imaginary characters and not of the poet himself, and because in it character is developed not through any description on part of the poet but through a conflict between the opposite thoughts and emotions of the character himself. It is a monologue because it is a conversation of single individual with himself. Mono means one and logo means conversation. In this dramatic monologue, Browning portrays wide variety of characters. For example, dukes, lovers, painters, scholars, poets, musicians, disciples, cheat and cowards, etc. In the last ride together, he speaks through the mouth of unrequited lover. In André del Sarto, through the mouth of a famous painter. In My Last Duchess, he speaks through the mouth of duke. In Fireside, through a lover, and in Grammarian, through one of the 3 disciples. Above all, characters are imaginative characters of Browning's dramatic monologue. Browning could dispense with all external machinery of action and plot and concentrate his attention on the incident in the development of soul. Unhampered by the limitation of the stage, he could now depict the phenomenon of the mind. Browning made this form entirely his own because it suited his genius and also because it has advantages. The main features of the dramatic monologue are comparison and contrast between the drama and monologue in its purpose and method. In the drama, the action is external, and in the monologue, the action is internal. The monologue develops characters not through outward action and conflict as in the drama, but through the clash of motives in the soul of the speakers. It is for this reason that Walter Pater has called poetry of Browning the poetry of situations. In monologue, again and again, the speaker expresses his critical situation and reaction one by one. Thus, in the last ride together, the critical situations is the lady's rejection of the lover, and it is the lover's reaction to this situation which forms the substance of the past. Thus, while in the drama there is action leading to a crisis and past is unfolded only retrospectively, there is no chronological sequence of events as the speaker's mind, in the process of self-analysis, moves backwards and forwards at will, and the past and the future are both telescoped in the present. A dramatic monologue is a very much like soliloquy in one man's speech, but there is difference between both that the monologue is much longer than soliloquy. The soliloquy is so short and is a part of private debate. In soliloquy, the speaker delivers his own thoughts without being disturbed by the objection of other person and speaks to himself when he is alone. In the dramatic monologue, there is the presence of second person that the thought is addressed and who listens to it, though they may not take part in it, Alan Brockington says some of the monologue are in the form soliloquy, but the majority are conversational. That is to say, there are listeners and the presence of listeners. Effects on the talk often the remark of listeners are indirectly introduced or indicated by the speaker's answers. Explaining the difference between a soliloquy and monologue, Bordeaux, in his Browning Encyclopedia, writes, I quote, the dramatic monologue is entirely different from the soliloquy. In the dramatic monologue, the presence of the silent second person is supposed to whom the arguments of the speakers are addressed. I unquote. In My Last Duchess, the listener is the messenger who has come to the Duke from another state to negotiate about second marriage. Thus, in Andrea del Sarto, the listener is Painter's beautiful wife. The Duke in Last Duchess belongs to the aristocracy. The grammarian belongs to the academic world. Andrea del Sarto is a painter and Rabbi Ben Ezra is a philosopher. Thus, the range of his characters is like William Shakespeare's. For the success of his dramatic poetry, we also can mention another reason that is like Shakespeare and he looks both good and evil with an equal mind. His dramatic characters are sometimes villain like the Duke in My Last Duchess and sometimes the characters are heroes like Andrea del Sarto. Browning's poetry is very realistic description that motive of movement which becomes like in My Last Duchess. I quote, oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her. But who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. I unquote. All characters of Browning's monologue believed in God, that their deeds, actions are attributing them by God's will. According to Bishop Brougham, is certain that his life of pain is stricken and tottering compromise has been really justified by God's divine. And Rhea say, his wife, at the end, God, I conclude, compensates, punishes all, is as God overrules. Browning's monologues are a mixture of half-truths and falsehood. They are not truthful records, but defense represented in a stricken and subtle style. They contradict what they say on one place at another places. Andrea says to his wife, I quote, had the month there urged God and the glory, never care for gain, up to God all there, I might have done it for you, I unquote. And later on he concludes the fault of his wife and makes quite a contradictory speech. I quote, why do I need you? What wife had Raphael or has angels in this world who can do a thing will not, and who would not do, cannot I pursue? I unquote. It is remarkable that Browning always in his monologue uses coarse, brutal and telegraphic language. The manner too is sometimes lyrical and emotional, sometimes narrative, descriptive, in keeping will to verifying moods of the speaker. It is worth nothing, says T.S. Young, that monologues are written mostly in verse, free and vigorous in rhythm, racy and actual bristling with colloquialisms. According to some critics' opinion, Browning's monologues are satire upon their characters, but probably these far from truth. No doubt, speaker expresses their follies and weakness, but as Chesterton points out, the monologues are not satire upon their subjects. They are not even harsh or unfeeling exposure of them. They are defense. They say art are intended to say is the best that can be said for the person with whom they deal. The Last Ride Together is a defense of the lover who failed in his love, and so is Andrea del Sarto, defense of a character of the painter. Another characteristic is that Browning's monologue expresses his philosophy of life. Hence, Browning's monologues are best vehicles to express Browning's philosophical ideas. In The Last Ride Together, the philosophy is based on the glories of failure. Browning's monologues are best known for their obscurity. He makes the heroes speak without giving a reference to circumstances. Hence, we totally fail to understand his speech and his meaning. And the poet has left the meaning obscure. To illustrate the charge of obscurity against him, we may cite, for example, My Last Duchess and also in Andrea del Sarto. The poet lays stress on the need of cultivating higher hopes and cherishing noble aspirations. And Darius also says, I quote, "Ah, I, man's reach should exceed his grasp for what is heaven for. I," unquote. This was all about Robert Browning's dramatic monologue in this chapter. Thanks, friends.